Good evening. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you this evening. My name is Howard Lyman. I'm a fourth generation farmer, rancher, feedlot operator. I travel around the world about 11 out of 12 months of the year, and I talk to people about the proper amount of animal products to have in their diet as being 0. And you look at that and you say, wait a minute. Fourth generation farmer, rancher, feedlot operator, talking about not eating animal products? This man must be smoking the #1 crop out of California. Well, that's the only test for the Supreme Court that I can pass. But what I'd like to do this evening is I'd like to talk to you about the future. I want to talk to you about how somebody can be a fourth generation farmer, rancher, feedlot operator and not eat animal products. I want to talk to you about the shape of the world. I want to talk to you about what the earth is saying to us. I want to talk to you about some of the things that Ellen G. White pointed to many, many years ago that are coming home. And we'll talk about that tonight. But the most important thing that I want to talk to you tonight about is, what can you do about it? That's the important thing. I don't want anybody to walk out of here tonight and say, oh, hallelujah, I have heard the gospel according to Lyman. I want you to walk out of here tonight and say, you know, that's the craziest ex-farmer I've ever met in my life. I wonder if he knew anything of what he was talking about. If you just listen to what I have to say tonight, I guarantee you in 60 days you'll be so busy you won't remember what I had to say. But if you invest yourself in the issue, if you go and get some books and start reading them, it'll be with you for a lifetime. And I will tell you right now that what we are doing today in our production of food in the United States of America is absolutely, totally non-sustainable. If there is going to be a future for our children and grandchildren, that future will have to be invested in your lifetime, or there will be no future for our children and grandchildren. The earth is crying out, and no one seems to be listening. If you open up the newspaper, or turn on the television, or listen to the radio, you would swear up and down the most important thing was the election or what's happening in Washington, D.C., but nobody wants to talk to you about what the earth is trying to say to us. You know, if tonight we were in Australia, we could open up the newspaper and we could see whether our children tomorrow could go out and play on the playground because of where the hole in the ozone layer is. They recommend in Australia today that everybody wear sunscreen, hats, and dark glasses. Who's putting sunscreen, hats, and dark glasses on the animals? Do you realize that the hole in the ozone layer today is twice as large as the continent of Europe? And just in the last 30 days, in the Antarctic, a hunk of ice broke off that is 1.5 times larger than the state of Delaware. And we've been talking for years and years about, is global warming happening? Do you realize that the hottest 8 months that have ever been in human recorded history were the last 8 months in 1998? That 12 out of the last 14 years are the hottest years that we have ever had on record. The United States of America last year sent a ship to the North Pole to survey the ice field. The ship was called Sheba. And when the ship got where they expected the ice field, they were 100 miles away from it. That the ice field had receded 100 miles. When they started drilling, they expected it to be 12 feet thick, and it was only 7. Today, the fishing fleet on the East Coast is sitting high and dry because we have eliminated the fish on the Great Banks. And if you go back and take a look, the explorers, when they came over and they wrote in their log, they said that the schools of cod were so great, they expected their ships would run aground on the schools of fish that are there. And today, our fishing fleets are sitting high and dry. Today, the United States and Canada are fighting over what few fish are left of the salmon on the West Coast. Do the Canadians have first right? Does the United States have first right? Who wants to talk about the first right of the fish? I'll never forget, I was in British Columbia. They took me out, and here was a sign, and the sign said, "Welcome to the forest." And for an area larger than the state of Rhode Island, not one living tree, that they had cut every tree down and did not have the common sense to take their chainsaw and go and cut down the sign that said, "Welcome to the forest." And the topsoil washing off into the streams has it today that the streams are so silted that the fish will not come back and will not spawn. And there is no question why there is no fish. These are the things that are happening around us all the time. How about this year? This year, we heard about the fires in Florida, the floods in China, the drought in Texas. And how about now we're opening up the newspaper and they're talking about 7,000 or 9,000 people dying in mudslides in Central America because of the torrential rains. Is it not about time that we listen that the earth is crying out? Is the important thing that we should be looking at what's on the front page of the newspaper about some scandal in Washington, D.C.? Or should we be talking about where's the future of our food? How about the prophecies of Ellen G. White? How many of us have actually brought out her writings and read it again and read carefully? You know, it's an amazing thing. Today in the paper, I just tonight happened to be given a thing that says, "A firm recalls beef." IBP on Wednesday announced the recall of more than 500,000 pounds of beef in 33 states after the meat was found to be contaminated with E. coli 0157H7. The company said a sample of ground beef produced on October 22nd at the IBP Dakota City plant was found to be possibly tainted with E. coli 0157H7, a rare, often dangerous strain. No illness has been reported, the IBP officials said as a result of the meat. IBP refused to specify what restaurants or distributors were affected. He said 71 retail food services and distribution customers bought the product. Should we not have the right to know where this product went? Should we not have the right to know what is happening out there in our food supply? How many of us are stopping and thinking about what happened in the state of Washington when they ended up with children? The children were eating hamburgers from a fast food restaurant, and they ended up with E. coli 0157H7. Some of the children died. Or how about the children that were infected that were at daycare centers? And the workers were changing the diapers on the children, and their hands were contaminated, and they ended up passing it along to other ones. It's an amazing thing. E. coli 0157H7 will kill children. When they did a sample of chicken, I was just up in Calgary, Alberta, and the television station went out and bought chicken at various supermarkets. They sent it to the lab and they came back, and 100% of the chickens that they bought were infected with either E. coli 0157H7, Salmonella, or Campylobacter. It was not 10 years ago that we never heard of a thing called Campylobacter. And today, Campylobacter has already mutated so that it is immune to the drugs that 10 years ago that we would use in that problem. It's about time that we stop and take a look at what's going on. It's about time that we stop and think, how many of us have ever gone out and walked in a park? We saw a rabbit. Did you want to pounce on it, rip it apart, eat it raw? Is there a person in the room tonight that when you see a poodle, your mouth waters? You know, If you open up the Bible and you read in the chapter of Genesis, it says, "My people will eat from the garden." Now, I stand in front of you tonight. I'm a fourth generation farmer, rancher, feedlot operator. I came from Montana. Montana is not the hotbed of vegetarianism. I'll never forget, my hometown newspaper put my picture on the front page and said, "Montana's most famous vegetarian." I called him up and I said, "Why didn't you tell it the way it is? Montana's only vegetarian." And they said, "Oh, no, there's an editor here at the paper is one of you kind of guys, so we know there are two." But you know, I was raised on a small organic farm in Montana. During the Second World War, my parents couldn't hire any help. My mother and father were milking cows. My brother, two sisters, and I were raised by my grandparents. Now back then, daycare is considerably different than it is today. No swings, no slides, no Lego blocks. Back then, daycare was working in the garden. And there I was, 4 or 5 years old, working in the garden. My first job, I had a jar, and I was collecting ladybugs and putting them into the jar, not to kill them, but to count them. The more ladybugs, the healthier the garden was. How many kids do we have today that have never seen a ladybug, have no idea that they tell you how healthy the garden is? Well, I will tell you, back then, 4 or 5 years old, putting my hands in real live living soil with the birds and the trees, I thought it was the Garden of Eden. The only thing I ever wanted to be in my life was a farmer. What a piece of cake. My parents owned a farm. I wanted to be a farmer. 12 years I could go to school. I didn't do anything but party and play football. I was very good at that. I never missed a party. But in 12 years, never one time did I ever take a book home. Never one time did I ever study. Can you imagine what a surprise it was to me my senior year? They came to me and they said, "Lyman, you're going to graduate." Almost had the big one right there. Couldn't hardly believe it. And if you think I had trouble believing it, can you imagine what it was like for my instructors? Lyman's going to graduate? Well, I figured that out. They looked at it and they said, "You know, no smarter than this guy is. We better graduate him. If we don't, there's a chance he may come back." Now, they didn't want to take a chance on that, but I didn't care. I was going to go home. I knew how to be a farmer. Shucks, nothing to it. You put the seed in the ground, you let the crop grow, you harvest the crop, you bank the money. No problem being a farmer. Well, I went home to that farm. I found that farm was a business to run. I didn't have the tools to run a business. I was dumber than a post. Now, I didn't let that bother me any. I did what most good red-blooded American youth, 12 years ago into school, didn't learn anything. I just immediately went on to the university. We have some people in here that completely understand that. But I went to the university not to do what I did in high school. I went there because I wanted to learn about herbicides, pesticides, hormones, and medication. I soaked up that information like a sponge. I went to Montana State University. I learned better living through chemistry. I got a degree in agriculture. I couldn't hardly wait to go home and take that information that I learned and take that small organic farm and turn it into an agribusiness. Now, when I went home, I said to my father, I said, "Move over. I'm going to take what I learned at the university. I'm going to turn this one-horse farm into an agribusiness." And he looked at me and he said, "What in the world is that?" And I said, "Oh, man, haven't you heard anything? Better living through chemistry." My father, he looked at me and he said, "I hate to tell you, but," he said, "our job is to work with nature." And I said, "Oh, come on. That's old-fashioned. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, they were all organic farmers. I was a chemical junkie." I took that farm with the information that I learned at Montana State University, and I turned it into an operation where I had 7,000 head of cattle, 12,000 acres of crop, 30 employees. I can't tell you what a thrill it was the first time I wrote a check for $1 million and it didn't bounce. I thought, man, I have arrived. I am the Donald Trump of agriculture. I knew all of the answers. If I wanted more production, more fertilizer. Get rid of insects, more insecticides. If you wanted bigger equipment, buy out your neighbors, tear out the fences. I was on top of the world. 1979, just when I thought I was Farmer of the Year, I got a wake-up call. I ended up paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors told me, they said, you have a tumor on your spinal cord. If that tumor is on the inside of the cord, you have less than 1 chance in 1,000,000 you will ever walk again. I will tell you that if somebody gives you the odds of 1 in 1,000,000, what they're saying to you is, hey, sucker, pick out the wheelchair you like. You're going to be in it the rest of your life. And here I am in the hospital, flat on my back. A lot of things going through my mind. But it was not about owning 7 combines at $100,000 apiece, or 20 tractors or 30 trucks. What kept going through my mind was why I became a farmer, birds and trees and living soil. I was buying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of chemicals. I was killing the birds, killing the trees, turning the soil into something that looked like asbestos. That night, I had to admit to myself, odds of 1 in 1,000,000, I'll probably be in a wheelchair the rest of my life. What kind of an invalid am I going to be? Can I make my life amount to something, or will I sit in a wheelchair and just say, oh, woe be gone, look at what happened to me just when I was on top of the world? I made up my mind that night that I would do everything that I knew how to do to make my life worthwhile. Even if I didn't walk again, I wanted to make my life count. And then I thought, how in the world do you do that? It's a lot easier to say, well, yeah, I'm going to do something, without understanding how you're going to do it. And so that night I made up my mind that the rest of my life I would try to get that farm back to what it was when I was a kid, when we had birds and trees and living soil. I had to think about it, and I thought, you know, when I come out of this operation, I'm going to turn to the nurse in the recovery room, and I'm going to say to her, how was the operation? And I know she's going to say, oh, it was terrific. Everything went well. No problem. Or if the doctor walked in and I said to him, an old friend of mine, I said, how was the operation? I knew he was going to say, superb, no problem. But I would never know whether I would ever walk again. And I made up my mind that night, that what I would do, the first thing when I came out of the recovery room, was I would put my feet down and see if I could feel the foot of the bed. Because when I went into that operation, I could not feel it. The next morning, they took me up and operated on me for 12 hours. I stand in front of you today, I have no bone on the back of my spinal column. And after they cut the bone off, sure enough, the tumor was on the inside of the cord. They split the covering on the cord. Not only was it on the inside, but it was under the cord. They could not pick the cord up to get to the tumor. All they could do was pick a nerve and cut it. Hope the tumor was attached like a fish on a line. They picked one, they cut it. They took out a tumor the size of my thumb. They took me back to the recovery room. And when I woke up, the first thing I remember hearing is the nurse saying to me, Mr. Lyman, you have to move up in the bed. And I will never forget what I said to her. I said, there will never be a day like that, because I can feel the foot of the bed. I was in the recovery room, and right next to me was a man dying of kidney failure. I had the most euphoric feeling I have ever had in my life. I didn't know whether I would walk again, but I could feel the foot of the bed. I could not roll over, I could not turn, and I was laying there looking at this individual dying little by little all day. Here I am, euphoric over the potential that I may walk again, and I see this individual with the life ebbing out of him little by little all day. And I watched him die. And I stand in front of you tonight, I have taken every day from that day until today trying to fulfill my commitment that I made, because I did not walk out of that hospital just on the skill of my surgeon. I walked out of that hospital on the grace of God. And did God send me out of that hospital to go back and do what I did again, to make another $1 million, to go out and put a few more 1,000 acres, to get a couple more combines? I don't think so. I walked out of that hospital and I said, you know, what I learned in Montana State University was nothing more than brainwashing. I knew that I had to go and re-educate myself. And the first book I got was Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. And for the first time in my life, I knew what was happening to the birds and the trees and the soil. And then it was Francis Moore LePay and Wendell Berry and Thomas Berry and G. Ellen White. And you know, all of a sudden, things were much different than what I thought before. And here I'd been paralyzed and recovering for about 2 years. Had 7,000 head of cattle and 30 employees. I don't need to tell you what the financial shape of my farm was. I went and saw my banker and I said to my banker, I said, I need your help. I said, we need to start farming with nature. And my banker, he reared back in his chair and he said, what in the world does that mean? And I said, I think we need to become organic farmers. And my banker, he looked at me and he laughed. He says, you want me to lend you money? You're not going to spend it with my other customers, the chemical dealer, the pharmaceutical dealer, the fertilizer dealer? He said, there will never be a day like that. And so 1983, I sold my farm. I paid my debts, but I didn't give up on the commitment that I made. I kept working with other farmers to do everything that I could so that they wouldn't do what I did. 1987, I got a call. And they said, how would you like to go to Washington, D.C. and work on Capitol Hill? I will never forget, I thought, oh, thank you, Lord. 535 members of Congress. I just absolutely knew they wanted to do what was right. Well, if you remember nothing else that I say tonight, I'd like you to remember what I learned 5 years working on Capitol Hill. I learned a thing called the golden rule. Them that got the gold make the rules. And after 5 years of working on Capitol Hill, I said to my friends, I said, this game is rigged. The deck is marked. We will never win here in Washington, D.C. And my friends, they looked at me and they laughed. And they said, what are you going to do? Go talk to the people? And I said, yeah. There is only one word that strikes fear into the hearts of elected politicians, and that one word is unemployment. Theirs. And guess where it comes from? The people. And my friends, they all looked at me and said, oh, come on now. You're never going to get half of the people to do anything. And I said, we don't need half. 80% of the people alive on the planet today are brain dead. They're part of the herd. They're following nose to tail. And when you're following nose to tail, there is only one thing you ever see in front of you. Less than 20% of the people are thinking. And that's what we want to do. We want to talk to the people that are thinking. This room tonight is full of people that are thinking. You didn't come here because you thought I was going to put the stamp on you and you would walk out and know everything. You came to learn what I had to say so that you could mull it over, that you could read and you could think about the future. That's what I want. I want you to think about what I have to say. I want you to invest yourself in it every day. There are enough people in this church tonight to absolutely change this community. And that's what we're about. You know, when you look in the eyes of the children, can you do less? Is this about a Mercedes in the front yard? Or is this about lakeshore property? Or is this about the future of our children and grandchildren? Well, I left Washington, D.C. I started going around and I started talking to people. And I was talking to them about, let's take a look at the facts. Now, I was raised on a dairy farm. There were certain things that I was absolutely sure of. Milk was nature's most perfect food. Milk did a body good. At that time, the dairy farmers were really in big trouble. And I thought, boy, if we could just get, in this nation, if we could get everybody to just drink 3 glasses of milk a day, we'd get rid of things like osteoporosis. It would be good for the dairy farmers. Now, I was talking about not eating beef, but at least the dairy farmers wouldn't be out there trying to get a tree and a rope and hang me. At least somebody would care. But I thought, before I do that, I better be careful. I better go to the Library of Congress. I better look up some of the facts to make sure that I'm right. So I went to the Library of Congress and I looked up the word osteoporosis. Lack of calcium in the bone. Right on. Dairy products absolutely loaded with calcium. Then I thought, what I'll do is I'll look up the countries that have the greatest amount of osteoporosis. And then I'll look up the countries that have the greatest amount of consumption of dairy products, and that will prove my case. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, the countries that had the greatest amount of osteoporosis, whoops, they were exactly the same countries that had the highest consumption of dairy products. And then I found that osteoporosis comes from a protein-calcium imbalance. Too much protein in the diet. The standard American diet has twice as much protein as it needs, 4 to 5 times too much fat, awash in cholesterol, and only half enough fiber. And when you end up with too much protein in the diet, it leaches the calcium out, and you will find that there will be more calcium that go out of the body in the feces and the urine than what goes in. Doesn't make any difference what the source of calcium is. I took that information and I raced over to see my friends that were involved in the Dairy Association, and I said to them, you're out there telling everybody to drink 3 glasses of milk a day. Look at the data here. And they told me, they said, oh, get out of here. Our job is to sell milk. And all of a sudden, I started going and looking up the studies that are out there. Do you realize that the Dairy Association at one time, they decided to do exactly the same thing that I was trying to do, telling everybody to drink 3 glasses of milk a day. They wanted some data. And so they brought in some very young, attractive, college-age women, and they measured their bone density. And then they had them show up 3 times a day and drink a glass of milk. And they signed every time. They wanted to make sure that it was documented, because they were going to go on this big campaign that said, look at how we have increased the bone density of young women by drinking 3 glasses of milk a day. At the end of the study, they had the campaign all set up, ready to go. They brought the women in, they measured their bone density, and whoo, they had less bone density at the end of drinking 3 glasses of milk a day than they did when they started. And they learned the same thing that I learned. Figures don't lie, but liars figure. The people that consume the greatest amount of protein on the planet happen to be Eskimos. The Eskimos have the greatest amount of osteoporosis in the world. And the Eskimos die 46 years old from kidney failure. You know, it's about time that we go and we sort out some of the information. And we sort it out from that we assume to be true. You remember when we went to school? Every one of us, when we went to junior high, we ended up having to take a home ec class. And on the home ec wall, there was a chart, and the chart said the 4 food groups. I'll never forget. I went there, we had a little old spinster home ec teacher, and we went in, and our job was to learn how to make cinnamon tea and toast. I can't tell you how often I've been able to use what I learned there. But on the wall was the 4 food groups. And remember, I was a jock. I was a football player. All I wanted to do was to go out on the field and run over somebody, knock them down. And here was the 4 food groups. And the first food group was meat. Absolutely. You needed the protein. You needed the iron. You had to have meat. The second food group, dairy. Can you imagine pizza without cheese? Un-American not to eat ice cream. Absolutely, you had to have dairy products. The third food group, fruit. Well, of course, you couldn't have a banana split without fruit. Mandatory. The fourth food group, vegetables. Yuck. 3 out of 4 wasn't too bad. That's what I learned. I learned the same thing as most doctors in the United States, and if you go to them today, that's the only course in nutrition they have ever had in their entire lives. My son-in-law spent 18 years to go to school to become a doctor. Never one time did he ever take a course in nutrition. And when my granddaughter came home, 16 years old, and she walked in and looked her father in the eye and said to him, "Animals are my friends. I will never again eat my friends." I mean, he almost went into shock. He got on the phone. He called a registered dietitian. He knew his daughter was going to die of something like bulimia. And lo and behold, my 16-year-old granddaughter started cooking for her father. The doctor put him on a vegetarian diet. He lost 85 pounds, and now he has opened 4 wellness clinics because he no longer is practicing sickness. He is now practicing wellness. This is what we need to do. We need to start thinking about what's going on around us. We need to participate in it. Now, how many of you here, I'm sure that there are some vegetarians here, that you go out on the street and you shout at people when they go by, "Be a vegetarian." They give you the 1-finger salute. You shake your fist at them. Did you change any of them? No. Well, let me tell you a story. I was a 300-pound football player, one of the first in the nation. I never found an animal product I wouldn't stuff down my throat. And when I quit playing football, I kept eating the same way. I got well over 300 pounds. My blood pressure was sky high. My cholesterol was over 300. I'd sit down and have lunch, and my nose would bleed. Now, I'm not a Rhodes Scholar, but I understood that I'd rather be caught riding a stolen horse in Montana than admitting to somebody I was a vegetarian. So I changed my diet, but I didn't tell anybody about it. I just became the world's worst vegetarian, lettuce and dairy products. And for 1 year, that was my diet. I lost some weight. My blood pressure came down slightly. My cholesterol came down slightly. And I thought, wow, if I can do that being the world's worst vegetarian, just think what I could do if I became a vegan. And I could spell vegan. I have lost 130 pounds. My blood pressure has gone from sky high to normal. My cholesterol from 300 to 135. I'm telling you what, I was thrilled to death. Not one person in 40 years of the longest ongoing heart study in the world, the Framingham study, has ever had a heart attack that had a cholesterol reading below 150. I couldn't hardly wait to share that information with my friends, my family, even my mother-in-law. Now, I've been married for over 30 years, and I will tell you right now, never one day in 30 years have I ever regretted marrying my wife. Now, she can't say that, but I married better than she did. When we got married, I knew the day we got married that it was important that one of us make the big decisions. I decided the day we got married that I would make the big decisions. My wife, she makes the small decisions. The small decisions are which ones are big and which ones are small. I'm telling you, this system really works. But I will tell you, in 30 years of being married to my wife, she came with a mother that has been a severe test. And here I am. I'm thinking about calling my mother-in-law. I'm thinking about telling her something that has the potential to extend her life. Now, I am telling you, I thought about that a long time. But I'm a Christian. I picked up the phone and I called my mother-in-law and I said to her, "Hey, Marge, I want to talk to you about this new diet that I'm on." And on the other end of the phone, I heard it go click. And I looked up and said, "Thank you, Lord." But did you ever notice when you talk to somebody about their diet, you say to them, "You ought to be a vegetarian," you can see their eyes roll up. You can actually hear their ears slam shut. I have one right down here. I heard his ears. But you know, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. It's when somebody comes up to you and they tap you on the shoulder and they say, "Are you one of those V people?" Then you have the 30-second window of opportunity to talk to them about why they ought to change their diet. And that's what I want to talk to you about now. I want to talk to you, what are the reasons for changing? You know, the Surgeon General said 7 out of every 10 Americans dying today are dying from something associated with their diet. 1 out of every 2 Americans dying today are dying from one thing: heart disease. The number 1 cause of heart disease, saturated fat and cholesterol. All cholesterol comes from animal products, 100%. You cannot find carrot cholesterol, cabbage cholesterol. You can't even mail order kale cholesterol. The majority of saturated fat in the human diet are coming from animal products. As we sit here tonight, 1 out of every 3 Americans will have cancer. 1 out of 4 will die of cancer. And in less than a handful of years, the number 1 killer in North America is going to be cancer. We have more people today working in the cancer industry out there, removing money from people's back pockets, keeping them alive until their health insurance runs out. But we're not going in the right direction. We're having more and more people every day. Today, I turned on the internet, and the internet said today that there was a study that was just published today that came out and said prostate cancer, one of the big killers of men, prostate cancer, the number 1 cause of prostate cancer, animal products. Or how about women today? 1 out of every 8 women today will have breast cancer. A few years ago, it was 1 out of 20. Then it was 1 out of 15, and then 1 out of 12, and today it's 1 out of 8. And they went and did a study on young women under 40 that were killed in car wrecks. They did autopsies on them, and they found that 40% of them had cancer cells in their breast. Are we going from 1 out of 8 to 4 out of 10? When I was in Washington, D.C., I worked on an issue that was called the bovine growth hormone. And we knew for a long time that if you took the growth hormone out of a dead cow and put it into a live cow, that the cow would produce more milk. But it was too expensive. And so genetic engineering came along, where they actually took a big old stainless steel tub and they took bacteria in there and they were able to genetically engineer recombinant bovine growth hormone. They would stick a syringe in, suck it out, put it into a cow, and the cow would give 15 to 20% more milk. Isn't science wonderful? We're going to feed a hungry world. But lo and behold, when they took these cows that had been injected with genetically engineered bovine growth hormone, in one of the tests, 14% of the cows died. 16% of the cows fell down and could not get up, had to be destroyed. They sent them to the University of Minnesota, did autopsies, and they came back and said the bones of those cows look like potato chips. And then 100% of the cows that were on the test either died, had to be destroyed, or failed to rebreed. But that product came on the market. Now we found that cows that were injected with the recombinant bovine growth hormone had a higher amount of a thing called IGF-1. IGF-1 makes your nose, your chin, your hands and feet grow. This growth hormone, the surprising thing about it in cows, of all of the trillion opportunities that we have out there, it's the only one we know that's exactly the same in cows as it is in humans. And when you inject the cows, the milk of the cow has an astronomically higher amount of IGF-1 in it. And we were told not to worry about it because it was destroyed in the gut, never got into the bloodstream, and we found that that was not true. And here, less than 3 months ago, they came out with a study that said women that have elevated level of IGF-1 are 7 times more likely to have breast cancer. Are we going in the right direction? Are we listening to what's happening out there? Are we hearing, or are we just going wrong? Every Friday we turn on the television and we have a new breakthrough. They have found a new drug that if you buy this, well, there's no problem about it, you're going to be wonderful. How about Theo Coburn? Theo Coburn wrote a book that was called Our Stolen Future. Theo Coburn says that every person in this audience sitting here today has 500 chemical compounds in your body that were not in any human body in 1920. She actually took a study of women that were pregnant, that were eating fish occasionally out of the Great Lakes, 2 meals a month. And they followed those children after they were born from women that were eating fish occasionally 2 meals a month out of the Great Lakes while they were pregnant, and they were checking them for learning disability, dyslexia, and lower sperm count. Every woman that was eating fish occasionally out of the Great Lakes when she was pregnant had a child with a greater amount of learning disability, dyslexia, and a lower sperm count. If we took today in the United States and took a sample of humans, human males, and we counted the number of dead cells, we could tell how old the individual was that gave the sample. Because the younger they are, the more dead cells. We have the lowest human sperm count we have ever had in the history of the world. Or how about the ladies, British Columbia? British Columbia, these nursing mothers were consuming fish out of the Pacific Ocean that were considered to be pristine. They measured the breast milk from those mothers and they looked at it and they found DDT, Enron, and Aldrin that had been banned for 25 years, along with PCBs and dioxin. If that mother's breast milk had been cow's milk, it would have been banned for sale. And it was being injected from the woman to the thing she loved her most, her child. Isn't it about time? Isn't it about time we think about what we're doing on this planet? I think there are probably some people in this room tonight that walked in here that drink milk. There's probably some people that walked in here tonight that when nobody is around, they eat chicken. And I know there's some of you here that eat fish. Now, we didn't tell you, but we had the vegan patrol at the door when you walked in, and we checked your breath. But you know, people come to me and they say, all right, I'm willing to make a change. I'll take one thing out of my diet. What's the first thing you want me to take out? And the first thing I would say, take out dairy products. Dairy products, why? The majority of North Americans, their bodies have an allergic reaction to dairy products. Kids with earaches, rheumatism, arthritis, asthma, all associated with dairy products. I have 6 kids. My youngest daughter, from the time she was a very little girl, always had problems with her complexion. Well, we took her to the best dermatologist, we bought the best medicine, nothing worked. My daughter was a sophomore at the University of Virginia at Charlottesville, and I read a book, and the book was written by a doctor here in California by the name of Daniel Toogood. And he wrote a book that was called No Milk. I read that book. I was amazed. These were case studies of his patients and what was happening to them and what they were able to do when they got off of dairy products. I read that book. I couldn't hardly wait. I picked up the phone. I called my daughter, and I said to her, hey, Mo, I just read a book about complexion and how you can clear it up by not consuming dairy products. And my daughter, she looked at me over the phone and she said, oh, Dad, you've been in California so long, you're just as screwy as they are. She said, I just love milk. I drink a half a gallon of milk every other day. And I said to her, Mo, I'll tell you what, if you go 60 days with no dairy products, if it doesn't help, I guarantee you that never again in your life will I ever recommend anything to you. And she said, boy, that's worth it. 6 weeks after she got off of all dairy products, she picked up the phone and called me up and said, hey, Dad, my complexion has cleared up. She said, do you realize that's the only good thing you've ever told me? It is not what we know that gets us in trouble. It's what we know that isn't so. And so for me, the first thing that I would take out, dairy products. The second thing, chicken. Chicken? Are you sure? You know, how many of you realize in factory chicken operations today, they have a machine that sucks spent laying hens out of their cage into a grinder and grind them up live and turn them into feed so they can feed them back to other chickens. That in factory operations today, they collect the manure and they feed it back to the chickens. Gives a whole new meaning to finger licking good. How many of you have ever gone, I know you don't eat it, so you're looking over the shoulder of somebody at a chicken emporium and they're eating a drumstick, and lo and behold, the bone has a blue tinge to it. Well, when my grandmother used to have chicken on Sunday, it was white. What in the world's happened? Is this a new blue-boned variety? We are feeding chickens in factory operations today arsenic to stimulate their growth. If one of us today was to walk out of here and die walking home tonight, according to the law, the pathologist would have to go and do an autopsy to find out why you died. The first thing he would do, he would go to the bone and see what color the bone is to find out whether you've been poisoned or not. We are feeding arsenic to stimulate the growth of chickens, knowing that it will kill them, but hoping that we can slaughter them before they die. And if it doesn't happen, they'll probably figure out a way to get it to you anyway. And if we look at the amount of chemicals, antibiotics, and hormones that are fed to chickens, I would say to you, the first meat that I would take out of my diet would be chicken. And the next one I would take out would be fish. Fish? Yeah. What we have done is we've used chemicals in North America. Those chemicals have washed off and into the water, and the fish are eating what washed off from here. When they asked Jacques Cousteau, they said to him, Jacques, do you eat fish? He said, not within 500 miles of North America, I'll guarantee you that. When we take a look at chemicals like DDT, Enron, Aldrin that have been banned for 25 years that happen to be in the fish, chicken first, fish second, and then red meat. The consumption of red meat in the United States has dropped 30% from the mid-70s until today. Ask yourself the question, when's the last time somebody came up to me and said, boy, am I eating more red meat than I used to? You never hear that. The question of diet comes up, the first thing they say is, oh, well, I never eat red meat. Fish and chicken's all right, isn't it? Well, no, it isn't all right. You know, every person in this room today, the day you were born, stamped on your forehead was a thing that said, this body and every part in it was designed for 120 years. How many of us know somebody that's lived to be 120? The day that we were born, our Maker gave us a body that every part in it was warranted for 120 years. And what we're doing out there right now with our environment, with our food, we are subtracting years. But our body was given at that time a little shovel. And that little shovel is there to shovel out carcinogens and toxins every day. It's called the human immune system. Every person sitting in this room tonight has at least 500 cancer cells in your body, and that human immune system can handle that. It's the problem is when we go and we start bringing the carcinogens and toxins into our body by the truckload. You know, it's an amazing thing. The United States Department of Agriculture says 75% of all the carcinogens and toxins that get into the human body in the United States of America get there in the form of animal products. That animal out there is eating his food that has herbicides, pesticides, hormones, medication on it, takes it out, stores it in their fat. And then what happens when we eat it? We end up with it stored in our fat. And I have people that are saying to me, oh, well, wait a minute. When I eat meat, I really trim all of the fat off. 70% of the fat is interior in the meat. When I talk at high schools, I say to kids, I say, how many of you here eat hot dogs? And boy, a lot of hands will go up. And I'll say to them, if I had a hot dog and it was 10 inches long, how much of it is good? Oh, greasy yellow fat. 20%? Somebody gets really risque, half. How about 80% of a hot dog is good old greasy yellow fat, and the rest is lips, snouts, eyelashes, and anything else they can scrape up. And it never fails. Somebody says to me, wait a minute, you're saying that 80% of it is good old greasy yellow fat? I had a hot dog the other day, it was red. It must have been kosher, right? It was okay. And I said, no, they used red food dye. Causes rats to have cancer, but don't worry, it'll probably do the same for you. And so, at least for that moment, you have them off of hot dogs. And so then you say to them, well, how many of you eat hamburgers? And boy, I'm telling you, then the hands go up because they don't want to be a hot dog eater anymore. Hamburgers have got to be a lot better. And then you tell them 40 to 60% of a hamburger are good old greasy yellow fat used to glue it together, because if you don't do that, it falls apart. And by act of Congress, a hamburger can only be beef and beef fat. Has a name hamburger. You would think ham came from pigs. By law, a hamburger has to be beef and beef fat. They take these old dairy cows, these skinny old cows with no fat, and they grind them up and they get the meat. And then they take all of that fat that they have trimmed off of the beef and they throw it in there to glue it together. 40 to 60% of all hamburger in America today is coming from spent dairy cows. You know, we should be asking ourselves every day, who produced my food? What are they using on it? What's it doing to me, the environment, and the animals? Those are the things that we should care about. Those are the things that we should wonder about. But we don't. We go down. I remember I was in New York City. I went to the high school and I was talking to the kids and I said, Where would you get your food if it wasn't for farmers? Kid raised his hand and said, we don't need farmers. We get ours at Safeway. You know, we're not paying attention. When I was in Washington, D.C., I worked year after year trying to get a label on the product that said where it came from, what was used on it, so that the consumer could tell. And the industry absolutely fights that because they do not want you to know that the food that you are buying is coming from Guatemala or Mexico. How many of you have gone down and you went there and it said organic from Mexico? I'll tell you right now, I would not buy organic from Mexico if it was blessed by the Pope coming across the border. It's about time that we pay some attention, that we ask some questions. What are they using on my food? You know, I met a guy by the name of T. Colin Campbell. He's the head of the Nutritional Studies Department in Cornell University. He's a farm boy. His college career is much like mine. He ended up with a PhD from studying of animals, how to end up fattening an animal as quickly as possible. Well, he decided to get into human nutrition, and he started looking at it, and he set it up and did the largest dietary study that's ever been done in the world, which is called the China Project. They ended up with thousands and thousands of replications of material from China where the government actually helped them collect the data. And it's the largest dietary study that's ever been done in the world. And he's in Washington, D.C., sitting across the desk from me, and we're talking. T. Colin Campbell is sitting there, and he's holding his cheek. And I'm a farm boy, and I'm pretty plain, and I said to him, I said, hey, T, why are you doing this? And he said, well, I'm the guy that identified dioxin, and the dioxin killed the muscles in my face. He said, did anybody in your family die of cancer? I said, yeah. I had a brother, 31 years old, died of cancer. He said, what kind of chemicals did you use on the farm? I said, DDT, Enron, Aldrin, PCB, 2,4,5-T, you name it, we used it. He said, do you realize 2,4,5-T used in Vietnam called Agent Orange is the one we identified the dioxin in, the most deadly chemical in our environment today, that it killed the muscles in my face. He said, 2,4,5-T will cause Hodgkin's disease in humans. What kind of cancer did your brother die of? And I told him, Hodgkin's disease. First time in my life that I understood that those thousands of spray tips that I had taken off of my sprayer, cleaned out, blew out, and put back on, that what I was doing was deadly. No gloves, no goggles, no protective clothing. And why my brother died and I didn't, I don't know. But I think it's really important that we take a look at what's happening. You know, I was invited to England. I went over to England as an invitation of the court to be an expert witness in the Mclecture trial. I went over there right after the Minister of Health announced to the English people that they no longer could assure the English people that mad cow disease could not be transferred from cows to humans. Well, I was over there. I did 70 press interviews in 9 days. I was the only person from the state that was over there talking about bovine spongiform encephalopathy. I never forget my hotel. They set up in the breakfast room a press gallery. They came and they put up Italian television, put up the camera, the lights, and I did an interview. They took it down, and then CBS put up their camera, and then ABC and NBC and French television and Finnish television. I ended up doing 70 press interviews. I walked outside. BBC had sent a car to take me down to do World Service Tonight. A guy jumped out of the car. He had a blue suit and a limo driver's hat, and he opened the door. And I am a farm boy, and I said to him, if you ever do that again, I'll break your arm. He took me down. I'm on BBC radio, and I said to the producer, I said, how many stations is this on? And he said, I don't know. It's in 200 countries. I said, 200 countries? And he said, yeah, a few thousand stations. I walked out of BBC. My limo was waiting for me. Needless to say, the driver did not open the door for me. I got in. Our next appointment was BBC television, directly across the street. We did a U-turn. I said to him, I said, I could have walked over here. And when I walked out of there, after doing BBC on 200 countries on television, they took me back to my hotel, and there were 7 newspapers waiting to interview me. It was like this for 9 days. When I got done, I got on the airplane and I flew back to Washington, D.C. or New York City. I got off of the airplane, I'm walking down, and over the loudspeaker I heard Howard Lyman pick up a white paging telephone. Well, being a celebrity, I looked to my entourage to take care of that. I was alone. I picked up the phone. It was Oprah Winfrey. Oprah said, we're going to do a show called Dangerous Foods. Could it happen here? Would you like to come to Chicago and appear in front of 20 million people? Well, I'll tell you right now, I did not jump at that. Being a celebrity, I waited 4 or 5 seconds before I said, you bet. I flew to Chicago. I got off of the plane. I'm walking down the runway. I'm carrying my suit. And here's a guy standing there in a blue suit and a limo driver's hat. And he's holding a sign, and the sign says, Lyman. I walked up to him and I said, is there any chance you could wait about 5 minutes? I'd like to find somebody to get a picture of this. He said, no. So I went outside, and I swear this is true. He put me in a limo that was so long, I had a phone to talk to the driver. Could have put a bowling alley in there. I was embarrassed. I'm just a farm boy. The windows, luckily, were frosted. Nobody could tell. They took me down to a hotel. They put me in a hotel that the hotel suite was larger than the house I was raised in with my parents, 2 sisters and a brother. The next morning, I'm up bright and early. I got my suit on. I'm downstairs. My limo is waiting for me, and I meet Oprah Winfrey for the first time. Oprah comes up to me and she says, you know, I saw the movie Babe 5 times. I'll never again eat pork. I thought, right on. Here I am. I'm put on the stage. To the left of me is a guy from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Dr. Gary Weber. To the right of me happens to be a woman, her granddaughter, 16 years old in England, dying of CJD. And Oprah Winfrey came out and said that statement that is branded into my mind. The next 42 minutes and 30 seconds will be with me for the rest of my life. She looked at me and said, here's a man who believes within 10 years we could have a disease that would make AIDS look like the common cold. And I said, absolutely. And Oprah said, that's a strong statement. I said, Oprah, 14% of all cows in the United States today are ground up, turned into feed, and fed back to other animals. If only one of them had mad cow disease, has the potential to infect thousands. And Oprah turned to Dr. Gary Weber from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and she said to him, Dr. Weber, are we feeding cows to cows? Boy, what a tough hand to play. He's sitting there saying, a limited amount of that's going on. As near as I could tell, about 95% of all of the animals in factory feedlots were being fed ground up animals, either cows or roadkill or euthanized pets, dogs and cats that were full of chemicals that were used to kill them were being collected, turned over to the renders, and turned into feed. The city of Los Angeles alone, 200 tons of dogs and cats a month are turned into feed. Well, Oprah uttered those famous words. She said, that just stops me cold. I'll never again eat a burger. She did not say that everybody in the audience shouldn't eat a burger. She didn't say that meat is contaminated. She just said, my opinion on what I've heard, I will no longer eat a burger. In the front row was sitting a guy that was claiming to be the foremost expert on spongiform diseases in North America, Dr. Will Houston. Oprah went up to him and she said, Dr. Houston, is Howard Lyman right? And he said, Howard Lyman is what makes America great. Well, that show went for 42 minutes and 30 seconds. When the show was over, it was being taped, I walked up to Oprah and I said to her after the taping, I said, hey Oprah, give me 10 minutes. I'll get you off a chicken. And Oprah said, only one animal a day. Well, you know, I knew at that time that I went on the show that 13 states had what they called food disparagement laws. And a food disparagement law says it's against the law to say something you know to be false about a perishable commodity. Well, there's no way in the world I'm going to go on a show and say something I know to be false in front of 20 million people. I was sitting on the stage, and you know what was going through my mind? What was going through my mind is what my wife told me before I went on. She said to me, and I quote, don't say anything stupid. You know, it was an amazing thing, that entire show. The only thing I called for is that we would not feed cows to cows. I never said that the meat is dangerous, that it'll give you mad cow disease. I just said we should not be feeding cows to cows. Every major health organization in the world on the 16th of April, 1996, agreed we shouldn't feed cows to cows. A year later, the Nobel Prize was awarded to a guy from the University of California, Dr. Stanley Prusiner, who came up with the theory of how spongiform diseases were transferred with abnormal proteins from one to another. Well, the United States government and the Canadian government, 6 months before we went to trial, ended up passing regulations that we would no longer feed meat and bone meal from ruminant animals. We would not feed cows back to cows. They were doing exactly what I called for on the show. But a group of Texas cattlemen filed suit against Oprah Winfrey, Harpo Production, and myself. I got a phone call. It was a news magazine, and they said, do you realize that you're being sued along with Oprah and Harpo Production? I said, no, I didn't know that. I said, can I put you on hold? I put them on hold. I raced into my library. I inventoried my vegetarian cookbooks. I knew those cattlemen wanted those vegetarian cookbooks bad. I went back and I said to him, I can't talk to you now. I got to put in a call to Oprah. I called up Oprah and I said, Oprah, we lose this suit. I'm throwing in my vegetarian cookbooks. You got to put up the money. Now, there's a couple of things I know about the law. Number one, never sue anyone who has nothing. That's me. Number two, never sue anybody that talks to 20 million people a day. That's Oprah. Well, we were going to be sued in Amarillo, Texas. I thought, this is going to be like a vacation. We're going to go down there. You know, every major health organization in the world concurred with what I had to say. They ended up awarding the Nobel Prize to the guy that came up with the theory of transferring prions from one animal to the other. The government did exactly what I called for. I'm going to go down there. The judge is going to pick up the hammer, slap it down, and say, case dismissed. Boy, what a surprise. I went down there. 25% of the cattle in North America are coming from around Amarillo, Texas. 120 feedlots averaging 55,000 head of cattle surround Amarillo, Texas. The largest employer in town, the slaughter facility, killing cattle. The president of the Chamber of Commerce put out a memo and said, we will not roll out the red carpet for Oprah Winfrey. We totally support the cattlemen. Bumper stickers all over town said, the only mad cow in Texas is named Oprah. Well, You could tell the well had been poisoned. We went to the judge and we said to the judge, we said, Your Honor, we'd like a change of venue. The judge, a 70-year-old plus lady, picked up the hammer, slapped it down, and said, motion denied. March in the jury. And here came the jury pool, selected from 22 rural counties. You never saw so many hats, boots, and belt buckles in all your life. You could have put hubcaps on every 1935 Ford ever built with the belt buckles that were in that room. I leaned over to my lawyer and I said to him, I said, we better write the appeal today. I think we got less than one chance in 100 that we can win. Well, at the end of the day, we had 12 people on the jury, every one of them steeped in the cattle culture. Now, I will tell you, if you're going to be sued with Oprah Winfrey, remember she does bring some resources with her. They say that every good lawyer in the United States in 30-year career will have one case like the Oprah Winfrey case. We had a consultant that had 7 of those cases every year. That first night, he came to me and he said, you know, we have 12 jurors. They're all steeped in the cattle culture. He said every one of them every Sunday will be in church. Every member of their congregation, every member of their family, every one of their friends will know they're on the jury. Every one of them will know that it has to be a unanimous verdict to either find you liable or not liable. And he said, we can defend this case on the facts. And he says, you know, we can go out and we can bring in people from the universities and they will swear up and down that every word you said on the show was true. And plaintiffs, they'll come and they'll bring somebody from Texas A&M and say, well, it isn't quite like that. And the jury won't know who to believe. Or he says, we can defend this on the science. So we can go to NIH and CDC. We can even go to England and we'll bring in the best scientists in the world and they'll swear up and down that every word you said was true. And they'll go out and bring in scientists that say, well, that hasn't been proven yet. But he said what we need to do is we need to give that jury a reason to look their friends, their family, their fellow parishioners in the eye and say, I voted them not liable, not for them, but for you. And that is the right of free speech. And that is the way that we defended the case. The plaintiffs, they brought in experts. One of the experts admitted on the stand that he was being paid in excess of $150,000 to $200,000 for 10 minutes of testimony. I'll never forget, he came in, he had letters after his name like you wouldn't believe. He had testified at more trials than you could count. And he was sitting there, he was a damage expert. And they couldn't hardly wait for this guy to say that this entire process was the fault of Howard Lyman and Oprah Winfrey. And so they brought this guy up and they talked about his great credentials and all of the cases that he had been on. And then they turned him over to Oprah's attorney, a guy that was world class in my opinion, a guy by the name of Chip Babcock. And Chip looked at this guy and said to him, he said, wow, you've really got a wonderful resume here. And the guy says, yeah, I am pretty good. And he said to him, he said, well, where did you get your degree in agriculture? And the guy said, I don't have a degree in agriculture. And Chip says, oh yeah, you have a degree in agricultural economics. And the guy says, no, I don't have a degree in agricultural economics. And he said, well, you're from a farm. He said, no, I'm not from a farm. He said, well, your grandparents had a farm. He said, no, they didn't. He said, well, you spent a lot of time at a feedlot. And the guy says, no, I've never been to a feedlot. And Chip turned to the judge and says, Your Honor, this man has wonderful credentials. As far as adding column A to column B, we will agree that he has the capability of doing that, but anything that has to do with animals, we do not believe that he has any expert status, and the judge agreed. And so here was a guy being paid $150,000 to $200,000 to say, if you add column A to column B, you get column C. And we said, we agree, thank you very much. And he walked out. Well, you remember I talked to you about at the Oprah show, in the front row of the audience was Dr. Will Houston, the foremost expert on spongiform diseases in North America. The one that said Howard Lyman is what makes America great. Well, we did a deposition with him in Baltimore under oath on videotape, and he admitted that every word I said on that show was true, except for one thing. Remember, I said 14% of all cows are ground up and fed back to other cows. He said he thought it was closer to 13.5%. And then he left the federal government, and the plaintiffs hired him as an expert witness, paid him $25,000, and he came down to Texas, sat on the stand, and said that every word that I said was a lie, every word that Oprah Winfrey said was a lie, and we kept asking him, which Dr. Will Houston should we believe? The one on the show that said Howard Lyman makes America great? The one that said everything he said was true except 14% should have been 13.5%, or the one that's sitting on the stand today, paid $25,000, that says every word's a lie? And he ended up on the stand crying. This is how it went along day after day. They brought in expert witness, expert after expert, corroborated everything that I said was true, that was factually based. Every word that I said on that show, their experts agreed were true. We were down to the end of the plaintiff's case. 4 weeks we had been there, and they had marched witness after witness in there. Our case kept getting stronger and stronger, and then they were going to bring 2 people from the Chicago Board of Trade. The Chicago Board of Trade, the day of the Oprah Winfrey show, went limit down, and they were claiming it was the Oprah show that caused it to go limit down. Now, only one place in the world is the Oprah Winfrey show shown before the Chicago Board of Trade closes, and that is in Chicago. Nowhere else in the world is the show shown until after it is closed. So the first guy they bring is a hometown boy from Amarillo, Texas. And he came and he said, you know, I've worked on the Chicago Board of Trade for years now. He said, I was there the day it happened. He said, I believe that the Oprah crash, the crash in the movement of limit down, is the responsibility of Oprah Winfrey and Howard Lyman. So I turned him over to Oprah's attorney, Chip Babcock. Chip walked out and said, are you being paid for your testimony? He said, oh no. He said, I'm down here because I think the cattlemen were wronged. I'm from Amarillo, these are my friends. I came down on my own hook. All I'm being paid is expenses. And Oprah and Chip said to him, okay, the day of the show, let's go by the clock. What time does the Chicago Board of Trade open? He said, 9:05. Said, okay, the Oprah show in Chicago goes on at 9 o'clock in the morning. Tell us what happened. 9:05, you're there? He said, yep. He said, I walked down to the pit, took me about 3 minutes. I got there about 9:08. He said, I got a call, and they said to me, you better take a look at the Oprah Winfrey show. I think it's going to affect the market. He said, I walked from there about 50 yards to the break room where there was a television set, and I saw the Oprah Winfrey show. He said, after that, he said, I went back and sold the market because he said, I knew it was going to go down. And Chip says, okay, let's put it this way. Chicago Board of Trade opened at 9:05. He said, that's right. The Oprah show started at 9. It took you about 3 minutes to walk to the pit, 9:08, about 5 minutes to walk to the break room, 9:13. What was on the Oprah show on the television set when you walked into the break room? And the guy stopped and thought, and he said, it was the lady from England. The lady from England was talking about her granddaughter. He said it was really gruesome. And Chip said, well, wait a minute. We'll play the Oprah Winfrey Show, and we showed that that was the first 2 or 3 minutes of the show prior to the opening of the Chicago Board of Trade. And you're saying that you got there, it was 9:05, 3 minutes, 9:08, 5 minutes, 9:13, and the jury, you could see them over there going, well, it was on the Oprah show at 9:03, and he was 9:05, and they're looking at each other and taking their socks off and counting their toes. And all of a sudden, the jury did not believe what he had to say. But we knew the next day was really going to be the tough one. They were going to have a man that was coming down from the Chicago Board of Trade that had been there for years. He was going to come down and say he was not being paid as an expert witness. He came down on his own hook, and he was there because he believed that the market went down because of Howard Lyman and Oprah Winfrey. We wondered, how in the world are we going to refute this guy's testimony? We knew that we could not go and use the clock again because they'd have that figured out. So the guy came down. It was Friday. The judge started the case at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we quit at 5. He's on the stand. It's about 10 minutes to 5. He is testifying that he got there, walked down to the pit, got a phone call, heard about the Oprah Winfrey Show. He knew the market was going to go down, so he sold the market, and he said, there is no doubt in my mind the reason it went limit down was because of Howard Lyman and Oprah Winfrey. Chip Babcock gets the witness. It's 5 minutes to 5. He said to him, he said, you're testifying here that the market went down because of Oprah Winfrey and Howard Lyman. It was not high grain prices? And he said, absolutely not. It was Howard Lyman and Oprah Winfrey. Well, the night before, at midnight, we're sitting there trying to figure out how to deal with this, and Chip Babcock says, you know, I have seen this guy before. I think he did an interview the day of the Oprah crash in Chicago. At 1 o'clock in the morning, we called the producer of the television station. We woke her up. She is one unhappy puppy, but she did go down, get the video, and send it to us. We took a look at it, sent it back, had it cut, and brought it back. And here we are. Chip Babcock turns to the judge and says, Your Honor, we would like to play a video. The judge, she looked at her watch and she said, Mr. Babcock, how long is that video? He said, 90 seconds. She said, sure, go ahead. So we put it up, and here's the guy the day of the Oprah crash. They got a microphone stuck in his face, and they said, what caused the market to go down? Was it the Oprah Winfrey Show? And the guy said, no, it was high grain prices. And Chip Babcock said, maybe the jury would like to see that again, and they played it back, and it was not the Oprah Winfrey Show, it was high grain prices. And Chip, at 1 minute to 5, looked at the judge and said, Your Honor, we passed the witness. The other side is devastated. Their star witness on the stand admitted that the reason that the market went down was high grain prices and not the Oprah Winfrey Show. They had the plaintiffs put their case on for 4 weeks. At the end of 4 weeks, they rested their case. We stood up and said to the judge, we said, Your Honor, we would like you to throw the case out. We believe they have not shown that any one of the defendants knew they said anything that was false. The other side expected the judge to pick up the hammer and slap it down and say, motion denied, put on the defense. But the judge didn't. She looked at the jury and said to the jury, you can have tomorrow off. She said, tomorrow the lawyers will argue the case in front of the bench. The next day, the lawyers are there and they're arguing about of and concerning and Sullivan and New York Times, and I don't know what they were talking about, but it sounded good. And the judge said, tomorrow I'll announce my decision. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, oh, judge, throw it out, throw it out. Well, The next day, the jury is back, and the judge looks at the jury and says, the jury will no longer consider the Texas food disparagement law. I'm sitting there saying, right on, Judge, right on, throw it out. And she said, I do not believe in 4 weeks the plaintiffs have shown that any one of the defendants said anything they knew to be false. And then she dropped the bombshell. She said, I do not believe that any animal that is walking around considered to be perishable. And I'm sitting there saying, right on, Judge, throw it out. And then she said, I will allow the case to go forward under straight business disparagement, which meant that the plaintiffs had to show that what we said was pointed directly at them and that we did it in a reckless fashion. It was a mountain they could not climb. We never called one expert witness, not one expert witness, to substantiate what I said, because we didn't need to, because their expert witnesses had corroborated everything that I said. And we had one statement that was left, and you remember the one that started the show? Here's a man that within 10 years believes we could have a case that would make AIDS look like the common cold. Well, the Supreme Court is very strong on this issue. The Supreme Court says that when she said, here's a man who believes, it was my personal opinion. Said, within 10 years, a future event. The Supreme Court says there can be no facts surrounding a future event. I could say to you, the Chicago Cubs are going to win the World Series next year, and my opinion is as good as anybody else's, because there can be no facts about a future event. And then the word that the case hung on, the word was could. A possibility. My opinion of a future event was possible. And the Supreme Court says you cannot find somebody liable for their opinion of a possibility of a future event. Well, we rested our case in 2 weeks. The judge said, tomorrow we will read the jury charge to the jury, we'll have closing arguments, and the case will go to the jury tomorrow. The next day, the closing arguments, both sides, were magnificent. I was hoping and praying the cattlemen would step on their tongue, but they didn't. They did a superb job, but so did the defense. And then the judge had the jury charge, and it was 8 pages long. And across the top it said, Oprah Winfrey, Harpo Production, Howard Lyman. Down the side were all of the plaintiffs: Paul Engler, Cactus Feeders, Texas Beef, Dripping Springs, Maltese Cross. And under each one was a little box, and the box said jury had to put yes or no. And if every word on the page 1 was no, the jury did not have to go to page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. The judge gave the jury charge to the jury. They were out 5 hours and 15 minutes. When the jury came back, I was in the defense room playing Scrabble with Oprah Winfrey. I'll tell you right now, do not play Scrabble with Oprah Winfrey. We marched back into the courtroom, and I'm telling you, I'm sitting there. They have removed every bone of my body and replaced it with spaghetti. The jury is sitting there. The judge walks in and says to the jury, have you reached a verdict? They said, we have. I'm sitting there and I'm praying. I'm saying, dear Lord, do not let her go past page 1. If everything on page 1 is no, we're out of here. The jury said, the judge says, pass the jury charge to the bailiff. The bailiff hands it to the judge. The judge looks over at me over the top of her glasses and smiles like Dracula. I'm telling you, I'm praying like I've never prayed before. Judge, do not go to page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. The judge looks at page 1, turns it over to page 2. And I think, boy, I sure hope the appeal we wrote's a good one, because somebody's going to need it. The judge goes to page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and goes back to page 1, looks over, smiles, and says, Oprah Winfrey, Paul Engler, no. Cactus Feeders, no. Texas beef, no. Dripping Springs, no. Maltese Cross, no. Oprah is out of there. Oprah has got a death grip on her attorney. She doesn't know whether no is yes or yes is no. And she's saying, did we win or lose? And her attorney said, shh. Oprah is out of there. The next thing the judge says is Harpo Production. Paul Engler, no. Cactus Feeders, no. Texas beef, no. Dripping Springs, no. Maltese Cross. There is only one left. Guess who's going down? And I'm sitting there saying, oh, I hope the appeal's a good one. We're going to need it. The judge looks over at me and smiles and says, Defendant Lyman. Paul Engler, no. Cactus Feeders, no. Texas beef, no. Dripping Springs, no. Maltese Cross, no. She knew when she looked at page 1 it was all no, and she took 10 years off of my life going to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Well, the judge looked over and says, the jury finds the defendants not liable. This was a jury that was drawn from 22 rural counties, a jury that actually listened to the facts and made a decision that we did not say anything that we knew to be false. The plaintiffs have appealed the case. We'll be in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal for about another year. And on the last day of the statute of limitations, 137 cattlemen went 40 miles up the road to Dumas, Texas, and filed exactly the same case in state court and stood on this courthouse steps and says, the reason we're doing this is this judge is up for re-election every 4 years, and we do not believe he will be intimidated with the celebrity status of the defendants. Well, I am not a resident of Texas, and so I moved that case from Dumas, Texas in state court back to Amarillo in front of the same judge in front of the same courtroom because I have that right to do that. But you know, this was not about food disparagement. This was about the golden rule. This was about a group of Texas cattlemen that thought they had enough gold, they could make the rules. One of them in an interview with the Wall Street Journal said, remember, the right of free speech is not etched in granite. I sure hope it is. Because I'm standing in front of you tonight, I'm telling you what I believe. And the Supreme Court says we should have a vigorous debate. We should have the right of free speech. I went and wrote a book. The book is called Mad Cowboy. I wrote that book so that people could go and find the facts of why I believe what I believe. That book will be available tonight for anybody that would like it, and I would autograph it. But remember, this is not about selling books. This is about the right of free speech. This is about the right of the future of our children and grandchildren. It's about the people in this room tonight informing yourself, so that when somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, are you one of the V people, that you can say, why? That's what's important. You know, today on the internet, I opened it up and they had done a hair analysis of the person that they found that was frozen in a glacier for 5,000 years. And they took that individual and they reported the autopsy of that person today. And an interesting thing, when they take a piece of your hair and they analyze your hair, they can tell what you have been eating. And that person, 5,000 years ago, when they analyzed his diet, they found that that person was a vegan. Isn't that an amazing thing? And somebody says to you, oh, wait a minute, they were all great hunters. Maybe they fell over a mastodon that was stuck in the mud every now and then, but the majority of those people were eating as the Lord declared from the garden. Is there anybody in this room tonight that believes that Ellen G. White is not correct? Is there anybody in this room tonight that when you look at what the earth is telling us and where we are going, cannot say to yourself, wait a minute, it is coming home to roost? Should we not do something about it? It's not about your job of saving the world. Your job is to save yourself. And I hope that every one of you here tonight will walk out renewed with the spirit of protecting the right of free speech. That even those people that we do not agree with, they should have their right to say what they believe. Because the truth will prevail. It is out there. I stand in front of you tonight, not because of the medical community. I stand in front of you tonight because the Lord looked down and said, I need a sinner to go out and tell it the way it is. I've been there. I've done it. And I will tell you right now, the production of our food today, in my opinion, is absolutely, totally non-sustainable. We have lost the majority of topsoil in North America in a little over 300 years. It takes 500 years to produce an inch of topsoil. We've lost the majority of what we had in less than 300 years, and we couldn't even produce an inch of it. We have today, off of New Orleans, in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, an area larger than the state of New Jersey that is absolutely, totally dead because of the herbicides, pesticides, and topsoil washing off of the central part of the United States. The Long Island Sound today is devoid of oxygen, not one thing growing in it. Should we not be looking at these things? Should we not be looking at the hurricanes, the volcanoes, the temperature? Are these things not warnings? Should we go out and just worry about how do we make some more money? How do we end up with more toys? Or do we move forward today and basically say, we can do better? Join with me. Let's make sure that we have a future for our children and grandchildren. And today we can do it if we start now. Thank you very much.
How can we find out which companies are using unsanitary conditions?
It's a good question. If you find in the back of my book, there is a whole list of references there that you can go, and there are organizations that actually go and take a look at what's in it. The Vegetarian Resource Group is a wonderful group. If you call them, their address is in the book, you call them, they will tell you which products that are out there, what's there. You know, it's a surprising thing. If we go to somewhere like Taco Bell, for example, you can actually get a vegan meal at Taco Bell. A bean burrito with lettuce, tomatoes, onions, no cheese, and salsa. Remember, with salsa, you can eat an overshoe. So take a look at what's out there and what we can get. Sometimes it'll really surprise you where they're coming from.
I'm also a vegetarian, and my question is, you've talked about the soil, and I've done some investigating into that. If the soil is bad, and we don't have the topsoil, and we don't have the selenium from, the Mississippi to California, what about the vegetables that we are eating and the fruits?
Wonderful question. If we talk about food that is grown on soil that is depleted, there was a study that was done in Germany after the Second World War, and somebody was saying, you know, our forests are really getting to look ragged. They're not growing what they should, and where did they get their mineral? And somebody said, well, it came from the glaciers. And they said, you know, what we ought to do is we ought to go out and put some rock dust, just like the glaciers did, and see whether it stimulates the forest. And they said, oh, that'd be way too expensive. And somebody said, no, it wouldn't. They loaded a plane, and they flew this plane over the Black Forest willy-nilly, and today you can go and follow the course of that plane because of the additional growth that is out there. I believe right now that the future is going to be in compost, nature's fertilizer, and rock dust. That's why I recommend to people to buy things that are certified organic, because that means that those people have to build up the soil. California has some of the best organic standards in the world. But remember, it should say certified organic, not just organic, and then pay attention to where it came from, because if it said it came from Mexico, remember what I had to say about the border.
I understand that casein is a protein from dairy.
That's correct.
From milk. What other protein does casein come from? Because you said something else.
As far as I know, all casein comes from animal products. And here's the difficulty. If we take milk, for example, or dairy products, and we put it into the body, let's say we have whole milk, 96% of it is water, 4% is fat, 100% of the calories are coming from fat. The only other thing that's there is protein, and when we take cow protein and we put it in the body reacts to it as an invader. We've actually shown where young children will end up with diabetes from cow's milk when they are young because of the open gut syndrome that is there. And so I would say that some people have a very low tolerance to these things that are there, and when you read the labels that are there, the thing to really watch out for is a thing called whey, which is what's left over after they've taken everything out of dairy products, and the other one is casein. They add them because they are so cheap that by the pound they make money. They bring no value, but the body will react to them. Keep them out of your diet.
What can you tell us about the use of partially hydrogenated and hydrogenated vegetable oils?
Wonderful question. We're talking about hydrogenated oil. What they do with it is they take a vegetable oil, which is a liquid, and they put hydrogen into it so that they will make it a solid. I will say to you right now that if something is hydrogenated, in my opinion, do not buy it. If you take a vegetable oil that has been hydrogenated and put it into a pan, it will give you something that is worse than actually using butter. Stay away from hydrogenated products that are out there. They are not good for you. Your body does not need it. Remember this, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. And whether we're talking about olive oil or canola oil, those are high in fat. Try and get your diet where no more than 10% of your calories come from protein, 10% of your calories come from fat, and 80% from carbohydrates. Your diet should be at least half fresh, raw, and organic. There's an old statement that says, get the fat out of your diet. Get the white out of your diet. The white, refined flour, refined sugar, salt, and milk. Get the fat out. Now, for young children, they need more fat to develop the brain. And so a young child should have more fat than an adult. If we look at mother's breast milk, that is the product for a child, and you will find that it is only 5% protein, but it is between 15 and 20% fat. That's what they need. A young child needs fat for brain development. The protein, keep it down. Animal protein, keep it out of their diet. Dr. Spock, who wrote a book of child rearing, the last one he wrote, he said that no child over the age of 2 should consume an animal product. And the reason he said that is because they should end up with mother's breast milk. We are animals from the time they're born till at least they're 2. After that, no animal products. And you ask yourself, why did Dr. Spock do that? Dr. Spock was in a wheelchair, could not walk. and they said to him, "You will be in the wheelchair the rest of your life." Some people went to him and said, "Benjamin, if you want to get out of that wheelchair, change your diet." He said, "You got to be out of your tree." He said, "No, go to a strict vegetable diet." He did. He got up out of his wheelchair, walked for another 7 years before he died. There was no doubt in his mind that it worked. That's what he put in the book, and I agree with him.
Dr. Lyman, you said two things that I wanted to make sure I understood. The word Campylobacter and IGF-1. Could you explain those two?
Sure. Campylobacter is a bacteria that we have found in chicken now that is becoming almost epidemic. 10 years ago, we didn't even know it existed. We'll find routinely in supermarkets when they do studies, as much as 80% of the chicken there will have Campylobacter. The surprising thing about it, Campylobacter has mutated in the last 10 years, that the drugs that 10 years ago worked on it, that they don't work today. IGF-1, insulin growth factor 1, makes your hands, your feet, your nose, and your chin grow. It is the only product that we know that comes from a cow that is exactly the same as it is in a human. And we have shown that women that have elevated levels of IGF-1 are 7 times more likely to have breast cancer. Cows that have been injected with the recombinant bovine growth hormone will have levels of IGF-1 in their milk. They have shown it in cases of being up to 1,000 times higher than it was in cows that were not injected. Whether this is the factor in the breast cancer has not been nailed down. But I would say that if I was concerned, and I would be, about breast cancer, one of the safest things for me to do would be to take dairy products out of my diet. I would not have to worry about whether the milk had IGF-1 in it or not, because they do not require it to be labeled that it came from a cow that's been injected. Okay?
Yeah, my question is, I've been feeling convicted lately. I'm a vegan, and I've been thinking about my shampoos, my conditioners, my toothpaste, my mouthwash, you know, all these different things that I use, and thinking that if I rub it on my skin or slosh it around in my mouth or whatever I do with it, that if it contains animal products, I'm putting it into my blood system. So
I think that this brings up a wonderful subject. If we take, for example, I don't know how many of you have thought about it, but when you actually take a shower, if you take a shower and the water is chlorinated, that the body will absorb the chlorine from the water into the body. If we take, for example, lipstick, the fat in a lot of lipstick comes from the rendering process, where they actually take dead animals, render it down, take the fat off of it, and it is used in the beauty aid products that are there. I don't know how many of you take a capsule in the morning of vitamins or minerals or whatever that is made out of gelatin. Gelatin is hoofs, horns, and hide from animals. A lot of the gelatin capsules in the United States are imported from England. I would not personally consume a gelatin cap. I would not consume Jell-O or marshmallows on a bet. If there is a doubt in your mind on shampoo or mouthwash or any of that, it is the best thing, in my opinion, to go on the side of safety. You can go to health food stores and you can actually find them. If you don't find what you want, go to my book. You can call the Vegetarian Resource Group or one of the groups that are listed. They will tell you the products that you have in mind. But I cannot, I've been to hundreds of rendering plants. I cannot describe to you how gruesome it is that there is not an animal that they will not scrape up, that they will not grind up, that they will not render down. And then I think about things like lipstick, that people are taking the fat that comes from the rendering process that is going into the product that they are putting on their lips, that they're rubbing on their skin. I think if we look at the rise in the amount of cancer that's out there, I believe a lot of it has to do with what we are eating, the environment that we're living in. You can take 91% of all the carcinogens and toxins out of your body by doing two things: a vegan diet and eating organic vegetables. That leaves the air you breathe and the water you drink. Be careful in the water you drink, because you will find bottled water that will say on it that it was drawn from a municipal source. I can remember when I was in Montana that I used to laugh at you folks in California that would buy bottled water. That we could go and stick our head in the creek and drink water, and I thought you were crazy. And today, when I see somebody drinking municipal water, I just look at it and say, ooh. It is not something that I want to put into my body. And so I try to pay attention to where the water comes from, where all of my food comes from. I cannot eliminate the air that I'm breathing, but the other things I can do something about.
Well, I just want to say that lips that touch lipstick will never touch mine. But the question I have is, could you please tell us about a bit about the McLibel trial?
I was invited, and remember that the McLibel trial, there were 13 people that belonged to a group that was called Greenpeace London. Of the 13, 7 of them were paid informers from McDonald's. They were handing out brochures in front of McDonald's. They handed out about 1,500 of them. McDonald's threatened to sue them, took them into court. It was the longest libel trial in English history, went on for years. Their laws over there on libel are totally different than ours, and so it's all about the defendants proving they were not liable. Well, here we had two people, Dave and Helen, that were unemployed, that would not knuckle under, that went into court and actually represented themselves for years in front of court. Over there, the expert witnesses are invited by the court, not the defense, not the plaintiffs, but are invited by the court. I was invited over as an expert witness. I was on the case. I testified for 6 hours. When I walked out of the case, I walked out, and in front of the courthouse was a whole group of news media, television cameras, and the whole thing. I thought sure that Paul McCartney was there. I was looking around for him, and when I walked out, I'm looking, and somebody looked at me and said, "There he is." I almost had a heart attack. The interesting thing about it is that the judge came down after years of the trial with a split decision between McDonald's and Dave and Helen. See, the judge said that Dave and Helen had to pay about $65,000 to McDonald's, but they were penniless. And so as soon as the trial was over, Dave and Helen went out and got a handful of brochures and started handing it out in front of McDonald's again, and said to McDonald's, "If you don't like it, sue us again." McDonald's spent about $6 or $7 million. At the same time, these two people had to defend themselves. But the interesting thing, the last I heard, the McLibel website has been getting about 1 million hits a month. And the last I heard, Dave and Helen were negotiating to sign a contract to make a movie out of that case. It is a class case of people that basically said, we will not roll over and play dead just because the other side has more money. And I think you see now that multinational companies are absolutely terrified to take people into court, because they will have the same thing happen to them of what Dave and Helen did. Two people that stood up. I was proud to go over and give what help I could for them.
Speaking of standing up, I've been having a really hard time getting WIC to give my son anything other than regular dairy products because he's not allergic. I have absolutely no idea what I can do. I've called everybody I know, and I just wanted your opinion.
Okay, there's a program the government has. It's called WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, and the dairy industry did their homework and they made it mandatory almost that every school provides cow's milk, that the WIC program has to do that. I think the only way you can get around that is go to a doctor and get a doctor that will sign a form that says that it's not healthful for your son. There will be a doctor here on Sunday by the name of Virgil Holtz. Happens to be a good friend of mine, started out as a milk inspector. I would highly recommend that you come and talk to him. He could probably give you more good ideas than I can, but I will tell you that the fix is in. It is very, very difficult. And you know, even to send your own beverage with your child is basically against the law.
Could you say something about any evidence of the possibility of mad cow disease already appearing in this country in relation to the downer cows and any other evidence there might be?
The United States of America, there have been no confirmed cases of mad cow disease in the United States, but there was an interesting thing where they ended up with a group of mink in Wisconsin were being fed down dairy cows. The mink came up with a spongiform disease. They took the disease out of the mink and they put it in the brain of 2 Holstein steer calves, the University of Wisconsin at Madison. 18 months after they did it, they did not go crazy, they just fell over dead. They took the brain out, put it under the microscope, and they died of a spongiform disease. They took it out of the brain of those 2 animals, put it back in the mink, and the mink came down with a spongiform disease. Now, the doctor that did that, Dr. Richard Marsh, he said that in England, they have the mad cow variety. Maybe in the United States, we have the downer cow variety. There are about 100,000 cows a year in the United States that are fine at night and dead in the morning. Most of those are collected, ground up, turned into feed, and fed back to other animals. In England, the first case of mad cow disease was viewed in a cow in 1986. By 1989, it was an epidemic. It got to the point where there were 1,000 cows a week that were coming down with the disease. The amplification of it, feeding cows to cows, is the thing that we should not be doing. In England, they ended up banning the feeding of cows or all animals in England. In the United States, we have just banned cows being fed to cows.
Today, we received word from USDA's National Veterinary Services Laboratories in Ames, Iowa, that a single Holstein cow from Washington State has tested as presumptive positive for BSE, or what is widely known as mad cow disease. Despite this finding, we remain confident in the safety of our food supply. The risk to human health from BSE is extremely low.